Designed this package to demonstrate the features of a vacuum form, to make the pattern and then actually making the part on the vacuum former in the shop. So I use this light bulb. It's an interesting item. I think it's worth showcasing. So it works really well in this vacuum form structure. This is a trifold, which means that we have it in three sections. We have the front, the bottom, and the back. And I made this out of 30 thousandths thick PETG. So this works out really well in our vacuum former. So we have to make our 3D data file, and we make our pattern. So our 3D data file that I'm going to demonstrate in this tutorial is to make this pattern. We're incorporating draft angles and certain radiuses and features so we can actually make the vacuum form part on top of this. So we had this one piece here that was just rough cut out. So that's how these are made. So this is a vacuum form. This has a protective film on it. That's why it's a little bit milky. And I have rough cut this out of a larger sheet. I'm going to do a more finite cut here along this line that I had drawn on the pattern. That'll be the edge of our flange. So the rest of this material here is this excess. But I'm going to demonstrate how to vacuum form that part on there. Like I mentioned, this is a trifold, so it's in three sections. So these three sections open up flat like this, and we have two hinge areas here, what they call living hinges, that allows this to fold up. What's nice about this, we can integrate our graphic component on the inside when it traps the product, and it completely protects that so it doesn't get dog-eared and beat up, so the graphic is on the inside. I just duplicated the art on the front and the back, but this could be done with a front art motif and then back art, and then we actually have some printing areas on the bottom. The trifolds are great. They're very secure, have a good, strong footing on here, and then by having all these molded panels, it's very, very strong. Trifolds are held together in a couple of different ways. One of the most popular ways is to use snap buttons. They would actually be these round little details up here in the top, and you have to cut a hole in your graphics so they can punch through that and they snap into one another. I don't particularly like them. I think they're very unsightly because you get these two pretty round giant holes cut into your graphic area, and they look a little awkward. They're very functional, but I think aesthetically they look odd. A lot of the vacuum forms that we've seen, we have that complete heat sealed edge, which is completely tamper resistant. It's almost to the point where you just can't open the package. You need tools to get it open. I don't suggest that either. That's kind of the other extreme. I think some compromises, which aren't bad, since this is very strong structure, all we really need to do is to seal this at the top. And I've seen these done with just a simple staple. And a staple actually isn't too bad because you can't see it that much. It's not so prevalent as a push button, and that can work really well at the top. Another thing we can do is do two localized heat sticks, which is basically a hot pin that we kind of just poke right through to both sides, and it engages the plastic in the back and seals that together. Those are much easier to open. Still takes a little effort because you don't want people to open it at retail and possibly steal the product, but it's easy enough when you get home that you can get the pack open. It's that kind of compromise of getting that to work. So I'll use this to demonstrate making the 3D data, which I'm going to do today. And then I'm going to bring it into the shop and I will show everybody how to use the vacuum form machine to make the part. And then I have another tutorial on how to trim it and finish it off. So I built a light bulb. It's a pretty straightforward shape. So it's just a revolve. But I texture map a photograph on that for rendering purposes. So let's take that off so we can just see the basic shape. I'm just going to color that. Take that off. All right, so what I did was I revolved that and then rotated it around and made two parts. And then what I would do is just cap off the top, cap off the bottom, and then make it a solid. Now, since this bulb is going to be formed in this pattern in a negative cavity, I need to account for wall thicknesses. So I'm going to do that right away. So I'll take this light bulb here and I'm going to offset that by 60 thousandths because I am going to have a 30 thousandths wall in my plastic, and then I want to have a little bit of clearance, a little bit of space. Just in case it's slightly off and it doesn't fit snug in there. So I'm going to add a little bit. So I'm going to offset that by 60 thousandths. And that's what this over here on the right, that's what this shape is. So it's a solid, and I offset it, and then I actually radius the top and the bottom there because that's part of the detail of the bulb. So what I'm going to focus on here is I want to start from the inside out. So that's my bulb. And I know I'm going to do a trifold vac form where it has three pieces. Now, a trifold has the front and the back that's going to come around and trap the light bulb. And then most of the time, it's a triangular section at the bottom. So I'm going to start with that. Over here on the left is my full graphic area that's going to be on the inside. I want that to be a certain proportion and be thick enough and substantial enough so it doesn't break. So I'm starting with this side view of this triangular base. So I'm going to look at that on the right side, and I can see how it's coming up around the bowl. It doesn't have to be a right triangle, but I used that and it seemed to work pretty well. So I got 45 degree on each side. It could be higher, could be whatever shape I wanted to, but I liked how high it came up on the bulb, and that was enough. And it also gives me enough of a graphic area on the base. So I'm going to have some skew information down here on the bottom. So let's just go to wireframe for a second. So there I built my triangle, and then you can see I have these two angled lines on the sides. So I'm going to angle the sides of those so I can build in my draft angle, because I need this to come off the mold. And I also want to determine how much graphic area I'm going to have left. So let's look at that from the front. So you can see I have these angles, and I'm going to cut that triangular section back down. So I think I probably put, looks like maybe 5 to 10 degrees, which is a safe amount of draft angle in there. So I have that on both sides. So when I trim that, I will have this image over here on the right. So that's the base trimmed, so that's ready to go. So I also want this other beveled look here. I want the edges of the vacuum form to come up on this curve around the outside, and I'm going to work off of my full graphic area that I have here. Let me zoom in back over here. So here's my graphic panels. I differenced the bulb from that graphic panel, and I created that front area. So that looks like that'll work pretty well in the paperboard. So now I'm going to build from that and create the rest of these plastic parts. So I'm going to start with the front curve. And I have that at kind of a minimum draft. So you can see I have this difference off here. Let me go back. I'm going to work with this arc that I have on my graphic. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to move one copy on center. And I had the line already created, but what I did was I just estimated how far away I wanted that from that top edge, because that's going to be pretty close to the top. It's going to be right back here, so it's not very far. So what I need to do is take that line, and I need to put that into orientation that I want to have here on the front. So what I did was I took that line and I independently scaled it. I'm going to go back to self, locking to the center. Oops, disengaged. Oh, I need to select that as an object. And I'm going to I scale. Snapping to the middle. And now I have that into position. I like the distance from that. Now I need to move this and get it to come up to this front panel. So now it's on center. So what I'm going to do is I need to bring that up front. So let's do that right here. So I have the lines already created. So what I did was let's just look at this from the right side. So I just took this line, and at the time, I just estimated where I wanted to put that. Let me just lock that in there. So I brought it up front like this. I need to create these other two lines that represent the front of this plastic part, but I need them to be exactly on the same plane. So right now, it is not on that plane. Because I do want to make that a surface so I can lock that all together and create a solid, which will be my pattern ultimately. So it's interesting with the pattern, we're building the mold that the plastic is going to be formed on. So I need to think about what that mold will look like. And then ultimately, so I'll get my plastic part the way I need it. So what I need to do here is rotate. I'll show you how I'm going to do that. I need that to rotate back and be exactly on the same plane. So what I'm going to do is create a guideline. So right now I am snapping to this line. And I'm going to snap to another part of this line. And just double click. Now I can select that segment. Now that segment is on that plane. So I'm going to move this. And I can really put it anywhere I want back on that line. So that's an extension of that. So if let's make sure this is locked in. Looks like it's a little off. I'm just going to turn off my horizontal snap like this. So if I take this, I have to snap. Okay, I'm going to go back to my vertical horizontal snap. Okay, I need to snap that right to that line. So I will have that line directly in line with these other two segments that I have here. Now these two segments that represent the front of that shroud, I created that by snapping to that point, coming down here, creating a straight line, and then I insert. Now I know that line is straight on that plane. So I inserted a point like this, and then I took that point and moved it out. I have an example of that right here already set up. I took that point, I moved it out. Oops, let me get. And moved it out to the side here, and then used my curve create to make that happen. I'm losing my cursor here. Hold on. This line right here. So I pulled the point out and I created that angle. So I used curves create, C create. I'm not sure if I have it on 3. Let's see if that's what I did. So if I select this line with that point on there, okay, that's what I used. It creates that arc right on the same plane with the arc at the top. So when I connect all of those, I will have a surface, which is necessary. I'm just going to undo that. So it's critical that I have all these together. So I took those 3 lines and I put them up here. The top arc mirrored over this other arc that I created. And I'm just going to join these together and do a test here to make sure that these all align. I'm going to join this to this to that. And then I'm going to use the close tool to close the bottom. And take a look at it here. So now it's in this gray color. So I know that that's a surface, and I can always check that. Because eventually I'm going to need to turn this whole massive part in the front into a solid. So under Inspector, Info, it's a surface. So I know it's not closed line, so that's perfect. So that's just a little test make sure that that was going to work. Okay, so after I have that shape created, I can then do my lofting. So the lofting would be, let's just get rid of this straight line here. And I'm going to ghost. So I have those front lines ready to go, and I have the lines around the graphic. So what I can do now is take, let's get the grid out of the way. I can select two segments. That one around the graphic, and then this front one right here. And I'm going to use the tangent loft tool here under the derive area. So I can take those two curves and select them and then loft them, and it creates that surface. And I'm going to do that on the right side and the top. And then what happens? And then I get this structure over here. And that's essentially my design. So now I'm evaluating this aesthetically. I see where my graphics is going to be, where the bulb is going to sit inside. And I have the layout of how the plastic parts are going to work. So it would essentially look like this. I'm going to have to add some radiuses, and so there's going to be a flange area and things like that. But this is now I can evaluate the aesthetic, and I have all these angles, the draft angles and these curves that I think look attractive with the bulb. They're also very functional at the same time, so it'll come off the mold. So I'm thinking about both things at the same time. So I'm at the point where I like the design, graphic area is good, and everything's looking fine. So now I got to turn this into solid parts that I'm going to use for a mold. So now I took all these front pieces, and all I did was rotate it down so it's flat. So you can see it's hollow from the bottom. I have my little notes here about what each step looks like. And I have the triangle here with the bulb also in position. So I just moved a copy of the bulb because I'm going to use that bulb to difference it from the triangular section and to also difference it from that front section. And then I'm going to mirror it around to create all those. So what I have to do is I had to build a floor, a bottom for this, so I can close that up and make that into a solid. So that's what I moved the lines around, brought that up, and then I stitched all those parts together to make that front wedge shape a solid. So then after I had that complete, which is sitting right here on top, I needed to build this other step, which is going to be for my flange. I have this step out area. I had that about 3/8 of an inch. I offset the bottom of that piece and created that part. I'm not sure if I have that ghosted in here. You can see I have all these parts ghosted. So once I did that, I made that flanged piece, and I have that approximately 10 degrees of a draft angle also. I now need to compensate for the thickness of the plastic. I'll show you the little step I have. Because that plastic is now, you can see the gray area. So I offset this in. I think I did that at about 30 thousandths. Maybe I did a little bit more because the plastic is going to go over this triangular section in the center, and it's going to go over this other part here. So I need to offset that inward to give me enough room for the two layers of plastic, which are about 30 thousandths each. Plus my piece of cardboard has to fit inside of there also. So I probably offset that about 60 thousandths on each one of these. You can see that little gray line. So these are now smaller pieces and they're offset. And you can see it's slightly offset from the center of the light bulb because the cardboard is going to go around the light bulb. So these are the compensations for tolerances that we have to make. And this one's a little complicated because it's a trifold. Pieces are folding up on top of one another. And I have allowances for the cardboard. So once I created those allowances and I made this extra base for my flange, I can then union these together. So right now, these are separate pieces. So I would union these two together, and I would difference the bowl from that. So let's go to my union tool. So I could take this part, that part, and union that together. And now I can difference. So this is all one solid piece. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to difference the bulb from that. So that creates the cavity that the plastic is going to go into. And in the beginning, I had allowed that 60 thousandths, where I had offset the light bulb larger. So now this cavity is larger than the bulb, which allows me a tolerance to get the plastic inside and then a little extra so it's not a complete tight fit. Same thing will happen with this other triangular section. That would also be a differencing. So I'm going to grab the triangular section and then difference the bulb from it. And then that creates that cavity inside. And this is also tolerance because the bulb is bigger than it needs to be. Okay, now this little space between the parts, that came from my offset. I had them touching at first, but then I offset them both out 60 thousandths. So it created this little space. And I know I'm going to need that space. So I'm going to put a hinge detail in there to get that to fold up. So once I have those done, I have all, okay, I didn't do that here, but I have all of that's going to be tolerance and locked together. I need to build this center section. So I have another section under the triangular area that's stepped up in similar height and a similar draft angle to continue my flange across the bottom. So there's where I unioned and differenced the bowl at that stage. So now I come over here, and what I did was I radiused these radiuses all around the top. I made these pretty tight because I don't want it to be too soft. And it's starting to take away from my graphic area. My graphic area will be on this surface. So I did those pretty small, probably about 60 thousandths all around. And then I did the center section a little bit more down here because it's quite a high peak. So once I radiused that on this front piece, now this is all solid and radiused, then all I have to do is mirror that to the other side because the parts are identical. So I'm just going to mirror that to the other side on center. And now I have all these three pieces ready to go. So what I did was I took those three and unioned them all together. And then once I did that, I built these rectangular sections here, which are going to allow the plastic to go down into this little trough. And once they go in there, the plastic will suck down in there, and that will give me my hinge area. And then I have that on my last section right here. So there it is going down in. So the plastic will go in there and create that hinge. And then I radius this last corner all around here and the corners of this base. That is not part of my part, but if I do radius those, I'll make sure that the plastic doesn't start webbing and get stuck on those angles. All I really want is this area. Let me just select that. For where my flange is going to be, I'm going to go to surface. So this area right here all around, that represents the end of my part. I'm going to trim that by hand after I make my part. And that'll be the flange area all around. The rest of it will be cut away. So this is ready to be exported as an STL. I'll probably do a polymesh to make it a nice, dense polymesh. And then I'm going to save that as an STL and make a 3D print. Now the 3D print I'm going to use FDM. And it's going to be kind of a rough finish. It'll have some of the grow lines on it. So I'm going to have to do some finishing. So we'll see how that turns out. So I have another tutorial on how this works and how to make a vacuum form part from this.